$2,000 is a lot to spend on an IEM. You can spend a lot more if you want to, but whether or not it's worth it is a very fair question. So let's find out. I'm beginning to do less IEM reviews now because there's just so many out there on the market. There are constantly too many new models being released, and it makes it really hard to keep up with contextual comparisons of IEMs that you might have heard. And that's because for every single comparison I provide, there's 50 others that I don't have here to try. And that's a bit of a challenge in a world where everything's about compromises. There's no such thing as a perfectly tuned IEM or headphone, and so comparisons are really helpful for you to identify which compromises you're willing to make. Are you happy with a leaner tuning to get the detail you want? Are you happy to sacrifice some soundstage depth? Does brighter, sharper treble not worry you? It's always a question of the trade-offs that you're willing to make. Or is it? The Tansio Mirai Halo is priced at around about $1,999 US, but I am being a little bit vague there because Elise Audio, who lent me this pair of Halos, had it listed at $1,757 US when I was doing my research. So you might find them on special from time to time, or with some price variations depending on where you're shopping. Either way, they're not a cheap IEM, and their design would suggest that there could be some limitations in their performance. With a total of 12 drivers per earpiece, you might be surprised to learn that they're only using 2 different sorts of drivers, 8 balanced armatures and 4 electrostatics. Don't worry though, these don't need some fancy energizer to drive them, because electrostatic drivers in earphones like these are a little bit different to full-size electrostatics. The combination of drivers within the Halos is set up in a 4-way design, and the result is an impedance of 27 ohms and a sensitivity of 105 decibels. And get this, a frequency response of 5 Hz to 74,000 Hz. That's remarkable at both ends of the spectrum. However, numbers on paper don't always translate to great sound, and with no dynamic driver in sight, I wasn't convinced that this new designed open hole bass armature was going to deliver the sort of bass that we're used to from great dynamic drivers. And so I decided to put the Halo up against some strong competition to see if they actually were that good or if there were compromises to be made. The opening passages of Gnome reveal an IEM in the Halo that has an astonishing grasp of textures, soundstage cues and spatial cues in general, not to mention resolution, but all without straying into getting lean, bright or harsh. There's also no undue emphasis in any frequencies. Even up against the much more expensive $5,000 FiR Audio Radon 6s, the Halos were unbeaten. The strings in this track have both texture and warmth to their sound as they should, and the oboe hovers out in space, clearly separated from the rest of the mix. Everything sounds about as good as I've ever heard on this track from the Halos. Swapping to the live recording of Ballerina, which is a really curious mix in terms of how things are laid out around the soundstage, and that shows again more excellence from the Halo, but it does also start to reveal those dreaded compromises. The tuning of the Halos that resulted in that wonderful sense of texture and resolution on the Avishai Cohen album now starts to make them sound just a tiny bit forward in the upper mids, and it makes the sound of Van Morrison's vocals just a little bit less natural to my ears. It sounds slightly over-enhanced compared to something like the Radon 6, but we need to keep 2 things in mind here. Firstly, we all have different shape and length ear canals with different resonances, and that means that you might hear these differently to how I do. I've got a full video linked in the description if you want to know more about what I mean there. And then the second thing to be aware of is that the Radon 6s cost more than double the price of the Halos, so they should be better. Another area where Ballerina does reveal a slight compromise with the Halos is in their bass. The track opens with a bass intro, and the bass lacks just a little bit of that tactile feel from the Halos when comparing it to something like the Radon 6. There's no denying that the Halos reach impressively deep, and they've got a lovely sense of timbre at all frequencies once we account for the fact that we all do hear a little bit differently, of course. However, for those that enjoy tight, punchy bass, tactile bass that you can feel when you should, the Halo might leave some people just a little bit wanting. But then you'll hear a saxophone solo or a track with a string section, be it classical music or pop music with strings, and you'll forget all about the lack of bass feeling because everything else is so wonderful. As with any IEM, headphone or speaker, not every track is going to sound perfect through every transducer, but the Halos do an amazing job of sounding pretty awesome across pretty much everything. Perfect? No, but what is? Putting the Halos up against the outstanding HiFiMan Svanar's single driver excellence, the Halos show themselves to have a distinctly less tight and snappy sound. On a funk track like Africano, the Svanars bring the rhythm in a way that the Halos can't, but the overall tonality is an easy win for the Halos, and they're the IEM that I would choose out of the two. A large part of that is that the Halos don't have and don't need sharp, bitey treble to sound exciting and engaging. But the other thing is that the Halos have a fullness and a solidity to their sound that I really enjoy. They're not as punchy and fast as the Svanars, but they feel more solid, and all instruments sound more real and more present as a result, even bass guitars, acoustic bass and kick drums. So don't think that the Halos are lacking in bass, they just don't hit you with the bass. You don't feel the bass in the same way that you might from a dynamic driver setup. And so if you haven't gathered this already, I actually think the Halos are brilliant. They are right up alongside some of the best IEMs that I have ever heard at this price. That's options like the Westone Mark 80, the 64 Audio U12T, the HiFiMan Svanars, and the Sounds Avant. As to which is better, that's a very personal choice, and I'm going to have to leave that one up to you. But what I can tell you is that the Halos deliver exceptional tonal balance, exceptional extension at both ends, and an overall character to the sound that's very, very hard to match. If that sounds great to you, I've got a link in the description down below where you can go and buy the Halos for yourself. If you're still stuck on deciding which IEM might be right for you, then you might want to begin with my review up here of the Westone Mark 60, 70 and 80 range. And for now, I want to wrap things up by saying a huge thanks to channel members, to channel Patreon members, and to those of you that leave super thanks on videos like this one. Until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.